When I was going through my transition period, I actually joined back up in the Army Reserves for a while because I felt that loss of identity or that huge cultural shift. So understand again that you can try something out, and if it aligns to your lifestyle and perspective and where you want to go in life or your values, then keep moving forward. And if not, it's okay to fail. It's okay to, like we said at the beginning of the call, a two-way door decision to go back. And it's not just returning to the military like I did for a brief stint, but rather stepping out of that and saying, I tried that didn't work. I'm going to try something else that didn't work, or I'm going to study this, or I'm going to try this career path, and understand that give yourself grace, I think, is the biggest thing, because you're not going to know what's going to happen. And I'm right there with you. I don't know what's going on half the time. And you don't know what you don't know. You got to give yourself grace that you're going to try something out. You're going to experiment, you're going to learn, and you're going to move forward. And if it's a good move forward, or if it's even, there's addition and subtraction. You can step back a few paces and say, hey, that didn't work out. I should probably readjust or shift fire. And you can go from there.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Post-Military Podcast. If you're new here, welcome. I'm very glad that you decided to stop by. This podcast is designed to help individuals transition from one major chapter of their life to another. And right now, we're focusing on moving out of the military and into the civilian world. My guest today is Hunter Tom. Hunter was in the Army and he worked in communications. And he now, after transitioning out, works at Amazon Web Services. In the episode today, we talk about his time in the Army, his transition out of the Army, and his advice and wisdom for those who are about to follow in his footsteps. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to listen, and I hope you enjoy the episode.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend.
That I will support and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Post-Military Podcast. I'm your host, Billy, and today with me is a fellow Amazonian, Hunter Tom. Hunter, thanks for being on today.
It's good to be here, Billy. Really excited to be here.
I'm really happy that you decided to come on and share some wisdom with all of our listeners. So let's jump right into it. Please tell everyone out there about your time in the military.
Certainly. So I think let's start at the beginning. So the first off, I'm the first in my family to be in the military, or to have served in the military. So I came into the profession not really having a clear understanding of what I wanted to do with my life. And I think that's a key theme that I want to share throughout. So I went into the military to really pay for college, what I wanted to do there. And I really wanted to become a history teacher in the beginning. But that honestly didn't really work out. So of course, spending time in the military, I got comfortable. I really enjoyed elements of being an Army officer. So was an infantry officer for a while at Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington State. After my platoon time, I moved into being an executive officer as a Signal Corps unit in the same brigade. And that was really my first foray into tech. So, coming from a history degree into the military, and then really dipping my toe in the water when it comes to technology. From there, became a signals officer, so an S6 in the same brigade. And I really didn't realize what I was doing. After a while, something really came up where I realized the things that I was doing day to day in terms of my career in the military wasn't bringing me joy. I was running around putting out fires. I was keeping things afloat, and I really had a passion to be a builder. And so that's where I started realizing, well, possibly the military isn't the best career path for me at that point. And then I decided, or I just wasn't excited as I used to be. I had a lot of fire and spirit going in, and obviously over time that is tempered. And so being in that position of not really being passionate about what I was doing, not really having the same joy, I was looking at other options, or saying, what's next for me? One thing to keep in mind as well is I'm also one of those people that if the house isn't on fire, I don't really like to get out of the house. So I don't really like to change what I'm doing. However, my spouse was really supportive in of me not knowing what I want to do with my life. I still don't. I'm still learning as I'm going. But really pursued me to pursue my identity and outside of my profession. So separating out my professional life from my personal life and ensuring that while we are essentially the sum of all our parts, that my professional life did not overshadow when people think of Hunter Tom. What is really who that is. What when they think of Hunter Tom, what is that definition in Webster's dictionary? So I think that that's a really quick, you know, throughout my throughout my military experience, and then I finally made the decision with the support of my spouse, with some family illnesses, to support my family to transition out and pursue supporting my family and really looking and going on an adventure on identifying who I was.
Yeah. So the first thing that I really want to ask you about is you talk about getting this passion as a builder. First of
Yeah,
all, shout out to all the history majors out there. I also did that. So that was one of the, when you and I talked at first, I loved that that was something that we could connect on as
absolutely.
people who studied history and then somehow ended up in tech. If you started off as a platoon leader and then you transitioned over into the signal corps, did where did you get that builder passion? Do you think it was something you already always had? Or did they send you to some training where you were like, wow, I got hands on keyboard? Because for people who might not be in the military who are listening, as an officer in the military, you're really a first line supervisor. It's your first job. And then you're going up to like skip level and then beyond. So you're really, unless you personally are into something or are in a very niche field, you're rarely the hands on keyboard or the doer. So where do you think you picked that up?
I think that's a part of who I've always been, and it's been a self-discovery where I really enjoyed exploring, adventuring, learning, and just being more hands-on in general. I think that's one of the things that drew me to the military in the begin. In the beginning, I didn't see myself at a corporate role. Funnily enough, I've kind of cycled back into that, being in Amazon. But yeah, I think it's always been a little part of who I am, and it's been through that self-discovery process of really realizing that and owning that as a part of my identity.
Hmm. And were you so when you were when they were saying like, "Hey, Hunter, you're going to be doing all this signal corps stuff," did you go out and kind of teach yourself all of the various skills, or at least so that you could talk the talk to the people that you were in charge of?
Fools. I had to learn. So it was I think another theme that I when I was reflecting over what I wanted to speak on is I had to fake the funk. Going through and just pretending I know what I'm doing, especially as a first generation person in the military, not really having anyone that I could reach out to and say, "Hey, how do I do what I'm doing?" But really build off the training that I had as my rudimentary training, and then from there, really rely on my NCOs to really ensure that I kept going and I kept driving us in the right direction. So I think part of that is that I fake the funk. Obviously, when you get handed a task, you can't fail. There's no margin for failure. So it was really about working together as a team to identify my shortcomings, what I needed to improve on, if it meant mad Googling in the background, trying to figure out, how does a router work or something along those lines, or how do I configure a radio, to even, really relying on the knowledge base and the backbone. Uh, that is my senior NCOs, and I shout out to all of them. I wouldn't be uh, half the man without their support, their guidance, and their mentorship during my officer time. So super super humbled to be under their tutelage during that time.
I think that any good officer would agree with you that the NCO Corps really is there to pick up CGOs, company grade officers, so early in their career officers for people who are unfamiliar with the military, and really guide them along. So I completely agree with that sentiment. When so you talked about in the military, you started separating your identity, your work identity from who you were as a person. How early on in your career do you feel like you started doing that? And yeah, let's start there.
Ooh, well, how early did I think I really started when um I became a platoon leader, where I stepped into this very ancient and honored tradition of being an officer of an infantry unit, and really saying, well, what does this mean? What does this mean for who I am? And how does this change with having more than just the tradition and having more of a legacy than just a simple family of, hey, I know 2 or 3 generations back to let's go back to the founding of the country, and really trying to continue and to continue that legacy on forward. And so that began my questioning. However, to answer your question a little clearer, I think that really came out during my time when I started transitioning out of the military, because I didn't have that tradition or that legacy to say, I am Hunter, I am a part of, X, I'm a part of this military tradition, and really use that as my core foundation. So having to go out on my own.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Before I dive into that, one question I am really curious about: what were the circumstances that resulted in a history major infantry platoon leader ending up in comms? Like, how did you make that? What
Sure.
happened there?
So ending up in comms, or in the military, outs like signal corps, or in tech,
In
like in
first in the
Amazon.
Signal Corps, then
Okay, okay.
I'll ask you about Amazon later. I'm just
Sure,
curious
sure,
how
sure.
they
That's fine.
just randomly picked a rifle platoon lieutenant and were like, "You're a computer guy now."
Well, one was the needs and availability of platoon leaders at the time. So as we were cycling out platoon leaders after my time, there was a cohort of us that opened up, and additionally, I was eventually supposed to be branch detailed signal corps. So what that meant was, after becoming a captain, I would go to captain's career course down in Fort Gordon to become a signal corps officer. However, since I didn't have any training at the time, they said, well, we'll just give you a little bit of training in the front end. So both the needs of the unit, one, and then that was primary, and then secondary, getting some, since I was eventually going to end up there, why not put me there until I was a captain. So
That makes sense. And when you moved to the S6, so you're leveling up in just your kind of reach, what were just for people who are unfamiliar with just kind of like like Brigade S6 work, what does that mean, just to paint a picture for people?
sure. So stepping out of when you become a platoon leader, you're in charge of roughly 40 folks. Uh, and you are more of hands on ground, sort of controlling what's happening in the moment. When you step into becoming an executive officer of a company, you really focus on, how do I enable those platoon leaders? And how do I enable those platoon leaders and those platoons to accomplish the mission? And then once we step into becoming a Brigade S6, I'm stepping out of that company into, or not, excuse me, not Brigade, Battalion S6. When you step into the Battalion S6, you're looking at, how can I enable companies to accomplish their mission? So if you think about it from that perspective, you have squads in platoons accomplishing stuff, accomplishing whatever needs to happen. Those platoon leaders supporting that mission, the companies are supporting that, and then as a battalion of six, really stepping in, and looking at, how can I support that mission at that scale. So some daily tasks that I stepped into, I was an Active Directory domain admin. I manage classified and unclassified networks in both on post and in austere environments. I manage satellite communications, as well as radio wave communications and retrans. So I did both, uh, retrans off of planes, off of the moon, through the atmosphere, at different levels of the atmosphere. It was super cool, and just really learning about that. And then lastly, of course, doing with the classified environments, being a cryptographic manager and managing encryption keys, and doing that sort of stuff, and managing computers and hardware that is running within the battalion. So
That's really cool. And for anyone out there who's unfamiliar with satellite communications and radio communications, we don't have radio stations on the moon. there's just certain waveforms that we can bounce off of the moon or off of different layers of the atmosphere to achieve something called line of sight. And it's really cool, super nerdy radio stuff. But before anyone out there thinks that we have stations on the moon that beacon back, we don't.
No,
So
no, we were using it as a mirror essentially. But if you are really if anyone's really interested out there, there's lovely novels, or not novels, but lovely army publications that will put you to sleep in pretty much instant. That is nothing but math on how to do that. So you can go learn how to do it for yourself and get a ham license, so you're doing it legally and not getting arrested by the FCC.
that's how I did it. So when you say you manage these radios, these satellite networks, these austere, all this stuff, just to be clear, you yourself weren't doing it. You were managing
Correct,
teams of
correct.
people to do it. Okay, just want to make sure because
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah,
yeah, and
that's a good clarification.
yeah, and I guess for you, so when you say you're a builder, I guess some people would say that building the strategy and um the vision for all these teams, like some people might consider that building, but for you, what would you would define building as more like I hunter go create a thing, or how would you define it builder for you specifically?
I think for me, building is proactive rather than reactive. So a lot of the things I was doing wasn't creating net new products and services. A lot of what I was doing was keeping things up and running. So obviously, if you have a radio network running in run or radio network running, it's not about, hey, I need to invent a new radio. It's, I'm a consumer of that product and I need to keep that up and running for the folks that are a consumer of my unit, of my shop. So that's where I think being proactive over reactive really makes a difference there.
That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, it's a for people who are in a any kind of service, whether it's IT or healthcare, anything where you're maintaining a service that's providing something to a consumer, it is really rough because it's almost a thankless job. Like, no one really takes the time to dig into a radio network and go, "Wow, that's really complicated. It's really impressive that you can keep that going." It's always it's just business as usual until one of your relays goes down and an entire squad loses comms. And then it's like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah, yeah.
So, it's just a rough place to be. But if you invent the new SATCOM, then you're like communications Jesus and everything's great. So I definitely understand why I think it's a really good delineation between maintenance versus creation. Um so so you kind of leveled up, you're in this like strategy stratosphere that you would rather not be in,
Sure.
maintaining communications networks rather than going out and creating new things. And so once you had made that decision, like, hey, this isn't for me, I'm going to start broadening my horizons outside of the military for a possible move. Um, what did that look like for you? What did you start doing in order to, I guess, fact find?
Huh. I think for me, it's not really knowing what next was for me. It was a lot of, well, what's out there, and really doing a lot of essentially just Google searching, like what's available, ask around, see other people that had left the military, ask them, see even other possible careers within the military, taking a look at cyber, etc., as well as some other branches, really just kind of exploring. And I think the hardest thing for me, and I assume this is going to be your follow-up question, but the hardest thing for me in terms of knowing what that transition looked like is not knowing what I don't know. And that was a huge that was incredibly scary for me, not knowing what I didn't know. So a lot of how I did my research was, hey, I know that you're transitioning out, or hey, um, what are my options? And really exploring that and essentially just making a choice and stepping through that. So
Do you think that, I guess, first question, would you say that most of your research was human based, like lots of conversations, or was it a lot of individual Googling? Which one do you think
Mm,
you did more of?
Probably more conversations.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it was through networking and through knowing folks.
Yeah, I think that networking is that's how I personally ended up where I am. I think that I have a really bad habit where if I have a choice between looking at a wiki and going and asking somebody a question, I'll go ask somebody a question 10 times out of 10, which in
Sure.
the company that I work for right now that's very wiki based, that doesn't always jive for me
Yeah.
very well because someone goes, "Why don't you look at the wiki?" I go, "Because you're right here and I can ask you." So I definitely think that for anyone who's listening, networking is, and you've heard me say this on many episodes or the guests say it, networking is so incredibly important because so many different people, just like Hunter, have just a wealth of information that can be valuable to you. Um, so going back to your other question, the other part that you said, which was you don't know what you don't know, which is like the scariest thing
Yes.
getting out of the military. How did you overcome? Because I believe that how did you overcome your overall fear of getting out with not knowing what you don't know, combined with your desire to tend towards stability?
Mm. I would say that. Hmm, that is an interest. Okay, so I'm trying to think of the best way to answer that. I know you're laughing at me now. I think for me is that not knowing what I didn't know and making that decision to leave the military. Should I left the military? Um, I think that there I'm not one to give too much advice to folks, and I'll because the thing is that you work in Amazon, I work in Amazon. One thing I always laugh and joke about our culture is that everybody has an opinion, and they're only partially right. And so I offer this advice that I'm about to give with that disclaimer in there is that I have my opinion, and I could be wrong, or it could just be a difference of opinion. So first off, making that decision to leave the military was incredibly scary. If I, truth be told, if it wasn't for my spouse Danielle supporting me and saying, she wants something better than me, better for me in terms of alignment to who I was and my interests, etc. I would probably again, house not on fire. I would probably still be in the military just because I don't want to deal with the headache. I'm comfortable where I'm at, even though it's not exactly causing me harm. Um, so I think when it comes to answer your question, is that it's really about making a decision and understanding that it's a two-way door decision. That if for some reason I step out of the military, I did corporate life for a little bit. I realized it wasn't for me. It's okay to decide to go back in the military. I actually had one of my battalion officers, uh, great friend, great mentor, great wealth of wisdom that I was able to leverage. He actually spent about 5 years out between his captain and his major time. And that was hugely formative for him. And again, going back to my theme of we are the sum of all our parts. Just because you try a path doesn't and it doesn't turn out or it doesn't work doesn't mean that it was bad for you. It means that you gave it the good old college try. And if it didn't work, it's okay to fail. I know in the military, at least in my position, I was terrified of failure. Everything I had to do would have to be perfect because for me, a failure was not an option. And stepping into a place where translating that as I took the military culture or the military tradition into my personal life and making that my own personal identity or a large part of that, seeing failure is not an option to happen lately and since leaving the military and failing a lot, honestly, and not just I fail every day. I fail in my day-to-day job. I fail all the time, and understanding that it's okay to fail but learning from that is important. And so, for those out there, my opinion or my advice would be, if you are feeling like you need a change or you need something different, it's okay to try something. It's okay to, for example, for me, take up bread making, and see, am I a good bread maker? Obviously not, because I've made some horrible, horrible bread during bread loaves during this COVID season. But obviously my spouse, she laughed at it, but she was just like, you know what? That's okay. You're doing something. It's fun. Obviously, lesson learned. Let's not have you make bread again. So, um,
Was
yeah, yeah,
was
yeah.
bread the weirdest thing that you tried during COVID?
No, 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 no. So, I'm slowly learning from bread, but like you, I don't like to read a lot of instructions. I just like to ask folks, and that usually ends up with some very interesting instructions. I've made yogurt.
Ooh.
I had a little tryst with crocheting. So like it's just pick up things, try it out, see if it works. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
cool. Points for you for using an SAT word like tryst in a podcast, by the way. That's sweet. So going back to something that you said that I think is really interesting. Do you think so I'm someone that I can really relate. Like
Sure.
I was my exit from the military was a little bit different. Like I knew I couldn't go back, but I still really approached my transition in a similar way to how you viewed stuff in the military, which is like, I've got to get this right. And there was a lot of stress um, associated with that, which I can completely empathize with you there. Do you think that knowing that it was a two-way door decision was the information that you needed to give you kind of the courage to move through that? And before you answer that question, just to give everybody like what a two-way door decision is, we both know because we're both Amazonians. It's a concept in our company that basically says if it's a decision that you make that you can walk back from with little to no consequences, it's a two-way door decision. You can walk into the door, you can say, "Oh, it sucks over here," and then you can come back. A one-way door decision is once you go through the door, it's done.
Yep.
So really cool decision-making concept. But once you had established that, hey, this is a two-way door decision for me, and you actually saw someone who had done that, was that the piece of information you needed to kind of sally forth? See, I can use SAT words too.
There you go. I like it. I like it. Yeah, yeah, I'd say so. Obviously, it's it's person and situation dependent, but I would say yes. I think once you make that decision, um, understand that there are very few one-way door decisions. Obviously, they exist and they can happen, or you can make a one-way door decision out of a two-way door decision, but that's a whole nother conversation. But the bigger part is situational dependent and personal or personality dependent. Yes, I think that understanding that uh, it's okay to try something and it's okay to fail and it's okay to say, I don't want to do this anymore. So, yeah,
Okay. And so I guess the next question is if that was the thing that you needed to see to have the confidence to get out,
sure.
what do you think you would have needed if it was a one-way door decision? How would you have tried to overcome that, like, I need to do this the right way anxiety if you couldn't have walked it back?
I don't think I think I would be a lot more scared to do it to actually. So I think I have done the predator prey thing of just freeze and just hopefully that hopefully either a decision is made for me, or I would definitely been a lot more nervous. And don't get me wrong, I was terrified. But I think I would approach it with a lot more fear, knowing that there's no going back. And so that's and one thing I would say though with something like that, having a support team, especially like as I keep mentioning here, I hold my spouse in the highest regard. Like she's a rock star. Like
As you should.
she's the reason that I can get up in the morning and do the things I do, because if I don't, I'll get a shoe thrown at me, one, and then two, she just keeps me motivated. She's my cheerleader, and I really appreciate her. Um, but I think having that support system, where even if it's a one-way door decision, saying, "Hey, no matter what you do, if you fail, if you do something right, if you fail forward or fail upwards, um, that's okay. Um, or you fail back, but having somebody in your corner is so incredibly important, and having that community where folks are looking after you and really trying to ensure that you are doing what's best for you and ensuring that you are being healthy at the end of the day. I think is the best way to put it, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think that I love that you keep talking about community because I think having that support system is very important because for a lot of people, when you get out of the military, you might not have that support system in the same way that you thought you did.
Sure.
And you really do need that to move past your time in the military. So I think that that's a wonderful call out. Before we kind of continue on, do you think what are some other tools that as someone who really needs to do things or really feels the need to do things right and has that associated stress, what are things that you do besides lean on your support system to
Sure.
kind of deal with that? And the reason that I
Sure.
ask is because I think that very few people view leaving the military as a two-way door decision. I think it's a very cool
Absolutely.
thing that you do, and I think that unless you're retiring or getting, like, medically separated, it always is, but I just don't think people mentally think like that. So, how would you tell them, besides a support system, to if you were in their shoes, what would you do to bring down that anxiety?
Hmm. I would say work in degrees. So understand that you don't have to, and what I mean by work in degrees is don't feel like you have to change everything overnight. And that's something that I find incredibly important, even in today's job and what I do. Um, I work in degrees, and so I don't try to radically change an organization or a culture or a product line or anything like that overnight. I I look at what is the next little bit that I can do in order just to make that 1% change. And so when it comes to leaving the military, I think the bigger thing to keep in mind is that you work in degrees. You say, "Hey, I'm not going to, radically change my life and come up with a 20-year plan overnight, but rather step into that and understand that trying to be perfect all the time, it's not going to happen. You're gonna work yourself into the grave. But rather saying, "Hey, listen, I'm gonna get this right, but I'm gonna allow myself one little area where I can be messy, I can be incorrect, or I can be wrong." And then from there, slowly work that into your schedule. And so then you allow another little area, or, "Hey, I don't like this about me," or, "I need to work on this." And then slowly over time, it's not an overnight thing, but slowly over time, you develop, you kind of allow yourself to release hold on that fear of failing or fear of doing something wrong, and jumping off into the unknown to being like, "You know what? I'll take a chance." So again, work in degrees and don't feel like you have to change yourself or change that fear of failure overnight.
Yeah, I think that that's wonderful advice, and it's advice that I did not follow when I got out of the military. I
Sure.
literally, uh, I got out, I got a new job doing something completely I mean, it was still in tech, but it was in, like, cloud, so, like, completely different. I moved across the country, and I think the only anchoring point that I had that was similar was my wife was still in the military, so I could get on
Sure.
base, and I was
Yep.
like I would literally go on base some days and be like, "Oh, this feels similar, like, this is nice." And it was weird, but now that I look back on it, I was like, "Oh, that felt so good to me," because that was a point of commonality that I had that crossed from my old chapter of my life to this new chapter of my life.
And I think that's incredibly important. And I agree with you 100%. That's actually something I tell when soldiers, my old soldiers, reach out to me and say like, "Hey, sir," I say, "Obviously, I'm not a sir anymore. I'm Hunter." But hey, sir, I'm getting out. And I'm just like, oh, that's great. And I usually check in with them. And one of the things I ask when I check in with them, or I advise them if they want my advice, but I say, you know, keep your schedule. You've been waking up at, you know, 5 o'clock every morning, in formation at 6, working out, doing these things on a Monday, Tuesday. They could write their schedule with their eyes closed, because that's what they've been doing for however long they've been in the military. Keep that. It's not bad. But I would really recognize or that there's value in that. I recognize the value in keeping that schedule, and then again working degrees to slowly release that. And for you, it was going back on base and just being in that schedule and seeing that schedule, that the hum of that organization, of that very intricate machine work around you, but slowly move off of that. And that's something advice that someone gave me, again, is to work in degrees, so I can't claim all the credit for that. But the person I was very good friends with said, who transitioned out himself, said, keep your schedule for at least 3 or 4 months, and slowly bake in free time to do other things. So again, for you, it was getting on base and kind of having that feeling like you're in that purposeful forward motion of the organization. For me, it was keeping my schedule and having that purpose in what I was doing.
I think that's wonderful, wonderful advice for people, for everyone out there. So when you knew that you were, so you knew that you were getting out, you started prepping by talking to different folks.
Sure.
How long was it between when you started preparing to get out and when you actually like here's your DD-214, have a nice life day?
Sure. Yeah, no, that was iconic. Still have I still, every time I look at my DD-214, I have fond memories. Um, but that took about, and antagonized or agonized, excuse me, agonized over that for about a year. So it was going through that process, thinking I was going to be getting out, looking at programs for transitioning service members, uh, signing up for those programs, going through them, and then really looking at the transition out. So that took about a year, I would say, start to finish.
Do you think that that was enough time, or do you think you would have started earlier if you had the chance?
Um, I don't really think it's time bound. I think it's when you're mentally prepared and ready
Fair.
for that exit. Because for me, even though I had like a year of thinking this over and considering it, and then submitting my paperwork and going through that transition process, um, on top of going to field deployments and all these things, it wasn't continuous. Um, it was very much in spurts. So it's not. I wouldn't say that you need a year, 2 years, 3 years to decide getting out. I think really it's about when you realize that there's other opportunities, or that you are considering getting out, begin prepping yourself, because it's not just, hey, I get a DD-214 and have a nice life. It is a cultural shift. It's an identity shift, like I talked about earlier. You're changing your schedule. You're changing how you dress. I remember the first week after getting out, I looked over at my wife and said, "Hey, what do I wear? I don't have a uniform for today." And she just laughed at me and she's like, "All right, you're gonna wear this and this." That kind of just giving me again that, hey, I'm not having to make all of those decisions right off the bat, but stepping into that and um, jumping from going hundreds, 100% in the military, full speed, full throttle, to the civilian life is very jarring. And so again, slowly back off and slow down and get ready that when you leave the military, you aren't running at, you know, 12-hour days, so on and so forth, working, or however long your days or your work day is. You're not running at going to the field every quarter. You're not running that you have to do all your certs and qualifications and going to the range, et cetera, like that. Having such a very your timeline stretched out in front of you isn't the important thing. The important thing is being able to divorce yourself from that and work your way in to being the master of your own identity and the master of your own universe. and where deciding where you're going to go.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that being mentally prepared is probably the most important thing. It's something that I harp on. I mean, the whole point of the podcast is so that people
Sure.
who are not thinking about the mental game that comes with transition start thinking about it before they ever get to that point. So I completely agree with that. Were there any programs or any things that you did during your year of transition that really were impactful to you that you would recommend that people check out, or just yeah, what would those be?
So, how I ended up in the position I am today, again, coming from a zero code, zero tech experience, other than just managing the folks, looking over their shoulders, and every once in a while stepping in and pressing a
Yeah,
button where needed.
shooting radio waves at the moon.
Yes, yes, yes. Again, just point the antenna in that general direction, and it'll
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 work.
eventually get there. Yeah. Um, so, coming from a no tech experience, essentially my third real career pivot. A huge shout out to hiring our heroes. So I had a couple of folks who transitioned uh, ahead of me, and some fellow officers that I was fellow platoon leaders with. They went through hiring our heroes and said, "Hey, that's a great program," and that really prepared me for the tech world because I went through that program. It showed me what corporate life was like. It showed me what it was like to be a builder. It showed me what it was like to market myself very, very succinctly, and it gave me those, to your earlier point, incredible networking skills and incredible networking connections. Not just the skills, but I was rubbing shoulders with the people that eventually hired me. And once I exited the program and got my DD 214, um, I was just like, hey, I'm ready, and I was picked up. I had the honor, and I had that. I feel very blessed that I was picked up with from the folks that I talked to.
That's really cool. So is hiring our heroes, is that in tandem with SkillBridge, or are those two separate programs?
Haven't been aware of the machinations of SkillBridge or of hiring our heroes lately,
Mhm.
so I can't say.
Yeah.
From when I was in back in 2017, and going through that, hiring our heroes was part of the Chamber of Commerce to essentially to link up service members with corporations around the base. My Again, I was fortunately aligned to Amazon. Other folks were in Microsoft, in Starbucks, in local startups, etc. And it was again to give them that corporate experience. So I don't know if it's in alignment with SkillBridge. Again, I haven't really
That's fair.
I don't know.
It's been a while. So
Been a
I
minute, yeah.
definitely, yeah, I definitely get that. Fortunately for all of you who are listening who have yet to transition, hiring our heroes still exists. It's a fantastic program. A lot of guests on the podcast have talked about it, and SkillBridge, which is just another method of essentially doing the exact same thing that Hunter did. And so I really do think that having the opportunity to try out a job before you have to hard commit to a job is a really massive benefit that people should leverage when getting out of the military for sure. Do you think that Oh, sorry, were you about to say something?
No, I said yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Support that
S
100%.
So, do you think that spending your time in the corporate world of Amazon, because you went into the office, correct? This is pre-COVID, so you
Yeah,
definitely
pre-COVID.
did.
I started in 2017 in
Yep.
Amazon.
And so, do you think that it was helpful to you to spend a certain amount of your time post separation working in the corporate world to start moving in degrees away from your previous identity as an officer in the military? Like, do you think that that factored in?
Partially, yeah. I think it's also really environmentally based. So, Amazon was very much, if you show up a little late to a meeting internally, it's okay. And I was showing up 10 minutes early to the meeting, getting everything set up and ready to go. And people are like, "What are you doing? It's okay. Like, relax. And I think the bigger thing to keep in mind is that that's okay. Again, I stuck to my military guidelines, manners, routines, regimen, whatever you want to call it. And I've relaxed since then, so I can show up on time or maybe a minute or two late. But it's okay. Again, it's about the corporate world was good for me to take that break from the military, and kind of work in degrees to be a little bit less stiff.
No, I definitely understand. It took me, I think I, going back to you talking about networking, I think I talked to like 300 some odd people when I was preparing for my transition. And I don't think I
Wow.
stopped calling people sir or ma'am until I was on like conversation 150.
Yep.
And it just took all those people to be like, chill, I'm Tom,
Yep.
or I'm Hunter, or I'm Bob. And I was like, oh, okay, sir, Bob. Like, it was so hard, but I definitely understand that the um breaking that down is takes time. It definitely takes time. But I would also say that for people out there listening, like, oh man, do I have to break down all of my military, all the isms that I bring from the military? I would say don't, because things like showing up early, being able to take on multiple tasks, like this something kind of like all of these things really help you become an outstanding member of whatever organization you're a part of. And something kind of just shooting a tangent off, has it been, as a Brigade S6, like, you really just grab whatever is thrown to you and then some? What was it like for you in your first role outside of the military where they hired you literally to do a thing, and, like, you don't like, they're like, "You you do the thing and you don't do any of the other things." Like,
Sure.
what was that like for you?
Well, one quick thing, I think I misspoke. I meant Battalion S6. I was in the same
Brigade.
brigade,
No, it's
same brigade, but yeah.
you
So
said brigade. I said battalion because I'm a dumb Air Force
no, no, no,
person
no.
and I
It's
don't
it's
know.
it's battalion. It's
Oh,
battalion,
is it?
not
Okay.
brigade. So I was in
Oh,
the
okay,
same
good.
brigade, but a different battalion or a different
Okay.
battalion. So I apologize.
Oh,
It's
it's all
you
good.
gotta love the translation. I apologize. Just wanted to clarify that for the
Of
folks
course.
on the call. So as a battalion S6, yes, you kind of you are juggling. You're juggling a lot of things, wearing a lot of hats. Stepping into the corporate world, it is a little jarring when they say you're working on a thing. Make whatever that thing is perfect, or just continue working on it. And our deadline or our timeline is 6 months from now. And you're like, wait, what? Like, usually I'm used to deadlines being last week or 2 months ago.
Yeah.
What do you mean
And I
I got?
found out about it today.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, and we're well, all our med pros are red, like just that sort of stuff. So and we're going on a deployment, we're going on a range tomorrow. So we have to cattle car everyone through whatever. So I digress. So yes, I think working on that and changing the characteristics that you learn and the isms that you learn from the military are incredibly important. Sir, ma'am, being able to deal with stress, juggling multiple things, wearing multiple hats will top block you. And don't take those things that you learned or that you learned how to deal with for granted. Again, like I said, we are the sum of all our parts. And as you go along this journey of life, you're still defining who you are. And as you add more experiences into your bucket or into your life, whatever analogy you want to use, that builds upon what is already there. So don't just start chucking things out because that was last week or that was last month or last career. But really about that is that it's about taking all these experiences, all of these things, and appreciating both the successes and the failures, and understanding that all of these things make up who you are, and it's okay. And who you are, you should be comfortable in your own skin. And so the military isms, again, I still have those. I still every once in a while will catch myself calling someone sir or ma'am. It's very it was very funny. I once in one of the buildings that I work in, another person was in there working as well, and they looked at me when I was talking on a phone call, and after the phone call, I said, "You're a vet, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah." And it's like, "Well, your posture of how you're sitting and how you're gesturing with your hands. I could tell you are a vet right from the start because she was a vet as well." And so it was very much just like, it's again the sum of all your
Yeah.
parts. So
No, that's awesome. That's a great story. I wonder how she would define a veteran talking on the phone. That's such a funny thing.
it
But
was like a dog whistle. She cocked her head, she looked at me, and then she was like, "Yep, all right, I know exactly. He's a military officer. He's an army officer." So she was
that's so
enlisted,
funny.
so she ragged on me for a while. So
Oh,
it
I'll
was
bet. I'll bet she did. Um, Before we kind of move into your time at Amazon,
sure,
do you have any final, any kind of advice that you would give folks who are just from a mechanics perspective? Like you
sure,
talked about networking, you talked about hiring our heroes, you talked about understanding the mental game of the transition itself.
sure.
Any other overarching advice that you might give someone who has yet to make that transition, so that they can kind of start gearing up for gearing up for their personal journey?
Sure. Yes, I do. I have two bits of advice, if you can allow me an extra slot. So first off, as we reiterated before, it's okay not to know. It's okay not to know what you don't know, and understand that everybody's in the same boat. It's not just people in the military. It's not just you. It's people everywhere. People don't know what they don't know. And the more and more I realize it, the more and more I extend grace to folks, and more and more I extend grace to myself that I don't have to be all that in a bag of chips. So just understand that you don't have to know everything. The key thing is that when you learn something new is that you iterate and you make that you fail fast, you allow that to be part of, you don't fail again on that specific thing. But I think the bigger thing that I want to kind of use that as a springboard to get into my main point is that it's about prioritizing the things that are valuable in your life. Again, you don't know what it when I was going through the process, I don't know what's important to me. But as I've gone through this process of transitioning out and still going through it, really prioritizing the things that are important to me and pursuing those. So don't think that I'm replacing the military with a corporate job. I'm replacing Hunter, the Army officer, with Hunter, the corporate the corporate exec or the corporate employee, but rather looking at this of saying, during that time, I am still Hunter. And so prioritizing things based on my values and pursuing that. So hobbies, um, you know, uh, hobbies, careers, networking and friendships, places that I wanted to live, etc. Where for me, I prioritized based on my faith, my family, my friends, community, and then work. So therefore, at the end of the day, when it's time to go home, when it hits 4 o'clock, I'm out of the office. Like people know that if you schedule something at 4:15, you're not going to get. And again, that's not because I'm trying to be bad, but because I prioritize that I want to that the things that I value, my family, my friends, my community, that I want to spend time with them. And that's what's important to me rather than say getting another promotion at work or working extra hard or finishing a project. And so not knowing what I didn't know, again, this has been a self-discovery process, but really laying out, even writing, it might seem cheesy, but writing out on a piece of paper what 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 is valuable to you, not what do you value, but what is valuable to you. And um it's not just look at what are the big foundational building blocks of of at the end of the day when push comes to shove, what means most to you. And so having, again, lining those up and then making sure that whatever you do in the civilian world, use that as the lens which then you view and you say, should I go into a corporate life? Should I do startups? Should I be like a small business owner? Should I not even have a business? Should I just work, in whatever industry? Should I be a cattle rancher? Whatever it might be, there is no real wrong decision so long as it doesn't when you're looking at it through the lens of what you value at that time, and again, your values can change at that time, you make that decision. That at least has given me the relief of not regretting the majority of decisions that I've made.
Yeah, I think that that's wonderful advice, and I think that it's such a important thing for people to do before they move from not just people leaving the military, but for
Sure,
people going from one chapter of their life to the next chapter of their life,
sure.
understanding those values outside of their job and understanding that a job falls within your values, but it's not the only, like, you shouldn't take all of your values and try to ram them into a job. A job is just an aspect of your life that is the summation of your hopefully your values.
Correct.
And do you think that people in the military almost overemphasize their job in their next chapter of their life because the military is almost like a lifestyle more than it's a job, but we don't think of it as a lifestyle until you look at it in post? Like, do you think that that's a fair state? Because that's kind of what my thought is, but I'm curious what you think.
I would agree to an extent. I don't think it is. I don't think that it is a unique characteristic that can only happen through a military
That's fair.
career. But I think it is very prevalent. At least it was prevalent in my life. I can't speak for everybody, but it was prevalent in my life. That's again what I really what drove me is that it was my lifestyle. It became who I was. And then understanding that a tangible thing, a job or whatever you want to call it, an activity does not make who you are. It does not. That is not a value. Your values are these intangible things that, at the end of the day, when you look back on you reflect on your day, that did you get heartburn from that? Did it rub it a little wrong? And so that's where, again, being more specific and being like, hey, I agree with this, and having these statements that say, I support X, or I think that Y is right. And then looking back on how your day and filtering that through and having that impact what you do every day, I think is the important part. I could be just ranting at this point, but I
No,
don't.
I think that your perspective is so incredibly mature because it's something that I've only recently started thinking about. Like in the sense that I think I told myself that there's a lot of things that I value outside of my job, but because I viewed my military subconsciously as a job,
Sure,
but it really was a lifestyle. And so
sure,
then when I went to my next job, which is not a lifestyle, I expected it to be a lifestyle, I think subconsciously, just because it's like the next job that I did. And so
that's what you're used to.
the yeah, exactly. And so then when I show up, it's not Amazon's fault. When I show up to Amazon and I'm like, this isn't as holistically fulfilling as I was expecting. It
Agreed.
shouldn't be. It's not.
No,
It's not supposed to be. And so I think that for you to be able to say, there's all these values, your job fits within there, and it can be a big part of it, but it doesn't have to be. But you
true.
need to understand how it applies to the individual, I think is such an important thing to think about, not just for the transition from the military to the civilian world, but just like from chapter of your life to chapter of your life. Do you how do you think you built, like, have you always kind of thought that way, or
No.
how did you get to the point now where you can, like, you clearly thought about this a lot, and I'm curious how you built up the built up this idea
This
to the point.
framework. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a work in progress. It's not done yet. I don't think it's ever going to get done, to be honest. I'm. This is again. This is five. This is like for folks listening. This is 5 years and it's still not done. So don't feel like you're going to change your life overnight and become this completely different person. You're going to have everything figured out. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. So that's where I am taking this and doing a lot of thinking and understanding that I try something out, I put it through, in Amazon, especially in my field, we have a lot of things called unit tests where you build a product, you build this code, and for folks on the line, the unit test is taking that product and code and saying, in this scenario, it should respond X, or it should react in this way, or it should give me this output. And then running your program or your code or your service through these unit tests to see, is it really doing the thing that you said it was going to do? And so relating that back to my life is taking thoughts, ideas, um, taking, new learnings, new cultural, celebrating the differences that I see with other folks and running it through those unit tests and understanding at times they might be right, and I might be wrong, or I might be right and they might be wrong, or we both might be wrong, or we both might be right, and it's okay to disagree. But celebrating those differences and understanding that run take time to understand this. And so don't think that you're going to come up with your own framework and it's going to be that mine is this great master plan. It's still in motion. It's probably going to change. And we'll see if it lines up, if it passes the litmus test of my values, and then the unit tests that I apply to it to see, well, this idea, does it actually align to my values, or does it accomplish what I'm trying to get out of it when I apply this framework to my life?
Mm-hmm. What resources or experiences do you think you have either consumed or gone through that have really helped shape this framework that you exist that exists within you now?
Hmm. I think it's just life. I don't want to say that I've gone to like a conference somewhere and I got this secret thing, or I read this book or this sort of thing. Honestly, it's just from daily interactions. If I read a quick article online, if I hear something on the radio, if well, I majority of it when I talk to folks and when I communicate and interact and I build that community, and then I really question the things and retrospectively think on the things that I engage with during the day, and then try to take notes, journal, say like, I didn't like this, like I was frustrated about this, or this rubs me the wrong way, or hey, I should probably do this, and then have that journal, refer to it, and not remind yourself daily, but go through that and learn. But I'd have to say life. I honestly don't have a good answer for folks, and I apologize for that, Billy. So
Oh, it's totally fine. I think that if I think that in my looking at after talking to you for the amount of time that I've talked to you in this conversation and previously, I think that the thing that I would probably credit you for building this framework is that you're incredibly um, insightful for yourself. You take the time to almost not post-mortem, but almost re-examine things that you've done, events that have happened in your life, decisions you've made, or things that you felt.
mhm,
And you don't just view them as things like you don't view them as things that like if you're in a car that are just passing by your
sure,
window, they're things that need to be stopped and examined because then they can chart the course for where you're going to go next.
sure,
And for people who are trying to develop that internal framework for themselves, sitting down with yourself and taking the time to examine who you are and understand who you are, why you work the way that you work, whether that be through talking to your friends, people that know you, going to therapy, things like
yeah.
that. I think are
Counselors
the
are great. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. I go to one every week, and
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
it's fantastic. But I would if I had to take a stab at it, I would credit a lot of your success in developing this framework with your ability to be insightful and ask these questions about yourself, and then be able to then apply those lessons to what's next in your
Sure,
life. So, I kind of want to move. I want to move on to Amazon,
sure.
because cool company. Uh, yeah, give me free stuff. But the one thing that I think everyone's really interested in is how did you learn, whether it was in the interview process? Because I know you had to re-interview for your job, even though you kind of had already done it. Whether you're in your interview process or post-interview process in your job, when people ask like, "What did you do?" or when you're trying to apply your experience in the military, how did you how do you translate your military experience in a method that people that have never been in the military understand?
Hmm. Well, I think that there's a a culture of mystery with the military community within the civilian world. And some people might say that, oh, the civilians don't understand what it's like to be in the military. Um, I was thinking over when you said you were going to ask something similar to this question. I was really thinking over how would I respond, and actually, I spent some time thinking. And the best thing I could say is how I respond is in a spirit of inclusion and diversity, really celebrating that it's not really a barrier, but actually a cultural difference, or a communal difference. And I think that seeing it in that light rather than, hey, there's this wall that separates me from the rest of the world, can be very isolating, but rather seeing it as a cultural or communal difference that I, again, I have a chance to celebrate and to share with folks who don't know, and understand that there's going to be some faux pas on both sides, and we have to understand what does it mean to celebrate those differences. And so, you know, treat, teach, and learn from others the same, uh, as you would from folks in your community. So, you're treating them. You're saying like, hey, this is where I'm coming from. It's different. We have different. We have different. We have different humor. We even have a different way of viewing things. Our humor is very differently, very dark. At least mine is. Um, but really looking at it as, uh, learning more about their culture, and sharing your culture, and having that communication where you can share funny stories of when you were in, uh, you know, reflect and celebrate that, and understand that, sometimes someone's going to mess up and someone's going to offend you, and just extend them that grace. And again, not treat it as a barrier where you feel isolated and that you can't communicate and you can't interact with them, to really being, hey, I'm from a different culture. You're from a different culture. Teach me about your culture. I will teach you about mine. And I do that all the time. In Amazon, it's amazing. I so thoroughly enjoy working with the cast of characters that I work with, from all over the world, from all different experiences and all different walks of life. That when I hop on a call, probably one of the first things I say is, hey, I don't know how you pronounce your name. Can you tell me how you pronounce your name? And they're like, hey, it's, whatever. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Like, where are you from? Like, what is the lineage of that name? And I start off the calls that way rather than being like, okay, misenunciate or completely butcher their name. And again, be okay to be okay to fail and say like, hey, I'm probably going to mispronounce your name. I'm sorry. But when I always tell them this is self-deprecating humor, is that, hey, I come from a part of the country where everybody was Bill, Sue, and Sally. So please extend me grace as I try to learn your new name. But I think it's so cool I get to meet somebody from this part of the world, and seeing that as a an area of celebration really broke down that challenge, and say like, hey, you're not supposed to ask those questions. That's not appropriate. Like that's for me and, my brothers, sisters, and servicemen in arms. And that could be offensive. Or can I just have a teaching moment? I don't know how to communicate here, or I don't know how to, what do you call yourself? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the culture I'm in. And being able to celebrate that and to learn from that, and have that as a two-way door communication. So being able to go back and forth and have that bi-directional communication is important.
I think that that's awesome, and I think that that's such great advice for people who not just going like, how do I talk about my military experience? It's just how do I interact with people that are different from me? And I think that, and I completely agree. I think one of the coolest parts about Amazon is I love the military because of the diversity of people that I got to
Oh yeah,
work with. It's like there is nothing like it in the US, in my opinion. And then you go
not at all.
to Amazon, which is a which is a global company, and you're working with very intelligent people from all around the world. And it's probably one of my favorite things about the company for sure is getting
Sure.
to every person you meet has a different story, and they're all from different places, and I think that that's really cool.
Yeah.
So, what do you do in Amazon now? And were you able to satisfy your builder nature n- in because you're still here. You never left Amazon. Spoiler alert for anyone who's confused on it. He's still at Amazon.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So my day-to-day job, I am considered a principal cloud infrastructure architect. I didn't start off there. So my interview process, again, going back to that point, networking is so important. Because if you cold call somebody in this uh, technology first world, or you email them, you text them, you send them a LinkedIn notification, they don't have any skin in the game. They don't have any grit. So by building those relationships, you leveraging them to get your community or to get into a scenario. I was incredibly fortunate to go through the hiring process because, truth be told, people would be like, "Hey, what's S3?" I don't know. Give me Google and I'll figure it out, man. Like I don't know what S3 is. And for those on the call, it's a storage system in AWS, Amazon Web Services.
And for
And
those
they
in the army, it's not the portion of the brigade or battalion in charge of planning. So,
Correct. Yes. Good point. I forgot about that. No, that's a good one.
uh,
So like they asked me questions like, "Hey, what's this? Why did you use this service? When would I use this?" And a lot of it was, I don't know. I have stories from my military life, and this is what I've done. And if you don't think I'm set, that's okay. But this is what I know, and I'm willing to learn. And really showing that ability and showing that I was given, like I said, I feel very honored and very privileged to have that position where they brought me in as an associate, and I've been with Amazon ever since. And I've gone through becoming an associate to consultant to senior consultant to principal architect. Um, so in my day-to-day life, to get to your question, I apologize for that long runaround.
not at all.
But I really focus primarily on helping customers, helping Amazon Web Services customers build out solutions in the cloud. So they say, I have this application or this data center or these requirements. How can I accomplish that at scale? And so that's essentially what I get to do now. And I build and I lead teams and I code. And right before this call, I was working on I was collaborating with a fellow Amazonian, um, on an internal dashboard for a tool that they're building for HR. And then just spending time working on that and getting my hands dirty, messing up a lot, and at the same time collaborating to better folks, to better the community, to better the world, to better my customers. And that's what I do.
That's really awesome. And it definitely sounds like you're able to satisfy that
Yes.
builder value that was the primary reason why you left the army. So I really love that you're able to do that. How do you feel like through those multiple different promotions in Amazon,
Mhm.
what do you think, and we've kind of already talked about like the isms of the military,
Sure.
but zooming out a little bit more, through this journey outside of the military, what parts of your military identity do you think that you've kept? And what are the things that you felt like you've left behind to now make the current version of you that clearly still has a lot of reverence for what they did in the military, but is now this person who gets to do this really amazing stuff in tech?
Sure. Um, Well, a lot of this was unlearning unhealthy habits. So again, those still exist, and but to your question, I think is learning that it's okay to fail. I think that's what the one thing I left behind that readily comes to mind. The isms that still stick with me. I deal okay with stress. Like I said, we were able to juggle. We being service members are able to juggle multiple things simultaneously, wearing multiple hats. Be able to contextually shift from one area to another very quickly. Those things, being being able to step in and take ownership, or really not really know what's going on, but make a plan and move forward and fail fast. Where, hey, that didn't work. Let's try to figure this out, and be like, well, I didn't read the manual on this, but we'll figure it out. Trial and error, we'll figure it out. And so those areas really moved me forward, and those are the things I've brought forward from the military. But I also just want folks to understand as well is that specifically within Amazon, the ideas of ownership, of of being more of a, I don't want to say aggressive in a bad way, but being aggressive in the sense of like, hey, someone needs to do this, I'll do this, or this needs to happen. And my military life aligned, or the things that I kept really aligned to the Amazon leadership principles. And so that's why I'm honestly here. Again, going back to our earlier conversation, and I want to stress this because, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I want to stress this because I find this so vastly important, is really, again, going back to what's important in your values and your framework, applying to that to your life. And if your job doesn't meet up to that or doesn't align to that, you shouldn't be there. Or you should really question, well, who's right and who's wrong, and can you reconcile that? And so for the isms, I think a lot of it aligned to the Amazon leadership principles, and that's kind of what has been driving me, and what I've kept from the military and moved forward. So
That's awesome. What do you think? Well, we kind of already talked about, like, you've really done a good job of talking about values and again, viewing your job as just a single part of your values.
sure.
As you've gone through your time at Amazon and gained more responsibility, how have you exercised uh, your desire to kind of spread yourself out into multiple aspects or disciplines in your life outside of your work? Because, and the reason why I'll ask this is I talk to a lot of people, and including myself, that again, we think our job needs to be that primary fountain of purpose, or like, and me finally having this breakthrough and realizing that doesn't necessarily have to be the case is one of the primary reasons why I started this podcast. But how do you um exercise like those multiple aspects of like spend time there?
Certainly. The first thing that comes to mind, and you can tell me if this doesn't answer your question, is actually, so, uh, my wife, she worked at a previous company, in the Seattle area, that one of their values was, or I shouldn't say their values, but really something that they strove for was a balance between all the areas of your life. And what I mean by that is it's not just, work and personal life. Step even further, zoom out a little further, but you have your physical, your emotional, your spiritual, parts of your life, your emotional, and finding a balance, and finding something that doing things in your life that align to that. And so when you ask me, like, how have you found this balance, is it's not really about choosing option A, or let's make this a little more realistic, choosing ketchup over mustard, but it's about finding that balance that allows me uh, to to hit all those areas, to hit all those check marks, and understand that it's okay not to, there's going to be give and take. It's not going to be perfect. Because what I don't want folks to walk away from this conversation with saying, I need to do these. Yeah, it's not the checklist mentality of I need to do these 10 things when you're doing, in the Army, it was motor pool Mondays, and going through and PMCSing your vehicles, but going through and having this checklist of, does it exist, does it, but rather, hey, things are going to be a little, messy. I don't know what option or what choice is right, but rather trying to find that balance between, again, your physical, your spiritual, your emotional, and which I keep always forgetting one: physical, spiritual, emotional, and
Mental?
mental. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, you got it. Yeah, so
Yes.
there you
Crushed
go.
it.
There you go.
Do you feel, in after getting out of the military, obviously in that transitionary period, I guess starting with your transitionary period in the military, getting out, how do you feel like your values, like your rack and stack of values, did you feel like they changed leaving the military, going into Amazon? Um, no? Okay.
Not
Do you
no,
f
no, I
no?
would say that again, it's a change in degrees, and so I didn't like walk in day one in Amazon and say, I am discarding all my previous life and these are my values. I walked in very much being a member, a service member, a prior service member, and then over times adopting, assimilating, challenging my beliefs, challenging just how I operate, and bringing that in. So again, reiterating, we are the sum of all our parts, and not just our parts, but our experiences. And so understanding that those will change, those will be sometimes, some days I'll be more, knife handing folks than I will just be like, hey, let's grab a cup of coffee and talk about life. But things ebb and flow, and it's very fluid, at least for me. Again, I'm not one with clear goals in mind, other than what I value. And so therefore, for me, it's very loosey goosey.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and as long as you're maintaining those values and then all of your actions throughout the day are kind of processed through that higher order of values,
Yep.
then it does make sense. Um, After getting out of the military, in your time, in your 6 years out of the military now, have you had to experience a reprioritization of those values? And was it how did you handle that?
Hmm. Yes, to answer your question, reprioritization of values. It's ongoing. I'm very self-critical of myself. Again, coming
Mhm.
from a culture of I cannot fail. I was very self-critical. I was always trying to be perfect. I was always doubting myself. So again, it might seem like everything's polished, but everything's held together with baling wire and duct tape. Um, but I think the bigger thing for me is that when I come across um, when I come across a different culture, a different idea, lifestyle, something I disagree with, it's not just my immediate response is to think that I'm always right. I always approach a situation and I always try to. I'm a very prideful person, so I have to remind myself all the time, like Hunter, you're probably wrong, and make sure that I'm stepping into conversations with folks and interactions from a humble perspective and saying like, hey, this is my thoughts. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, please tell me so I can adjust. And when someone tells me I'm wrong, which they do a lot, I can go back and I say, well, am I really wrong? And think on it, and like you said, a post-mortem or after action review, uh, really analyze, does this align to my values and the bigger building blocks of my values? And when I put it through my frame, should I think this way or um, should I act this way? Should I say these things? And so that's generally that's generally how I would answer that question is yes, my values change, but again, those fundamental building blocks do not. And that's where I apply what happens day to day or my actions and what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling through those values, and then I retrospectively say I probably shouldn't be saying that, or I shouldn't be thinking that, or I shouldn't be interacting with someone like that. I need to be better.
Hmm, that makes a lot of sense. Um, for someone who is preparing for just either the transition out of the military, or has already transitioned out of the military, or shoot, anyone who's like made a transition in their life, um, what outside of this discussion of values that we've already had, which I think is incredibly poignant to the question I'm about to ask, would you have any other advice, of course, from your perspective, which it varies from person to person, but from your perspective,
Sure.
what advice would you give somebody who is to tackle um this dissociation of identity from something that they were ingrained in before, um and they're moving into something new now
So
outside of values and operating in degrees of change? Because I think those are the two big ones that you've
Yeah.
stated already that I personally have walked away from so far.
Well, uh, when I was going through my transition period, I actually joined back up in the Army Reserves for a while because I wanted to. Uh, I felt that loss of identity or that huge cultural shift. So understand again that you can try something out, and if it aligns to your lifestyle and perspective and where you want to go in life or your values, then keep moving forward. And if not, it's okay to fail. It's okay to like we said at the beginning of the call, a two-way door decision to go back. And it's not just returning to the military like I did for a brief stint, but rather stepping out of that and saying, well, I tried that didn't work. Well, I'm going to try something else that didn't work. Or I'm going to study this, or I'm going to try this career path, and understand that give yourself grace, I think, is the biggest thing. Um, because you're not going to know what's going to happen, and I'm right there with you. Uh, I don't know what's going on half the time, and you don't know what you don't know. You got to give yourself grace that you're going to try something out, you're going to experiment, you're going to learn, and you're going to move forward. And if it's a good move forward, or if it's even there's addition and subtraction. You can step back a few paces and say, hey, that didn't work out. I should probably readjust, or shift fire, and you can go from there.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I definitely agree that giving yourself grace and not putting yourself under a significant amount of pressure is good. It's very healthy because like all you're going to do is create more stress when you're just going to stack stress on stress if you're not willing to give yourself if you're not willing to give yourself grace. Um, how long were you in the reserves, and when did you like? I understand why you got back in, but what changed for you to get back out? Like, how did you hit how did you know you were done? Like,
Yeah,
what did that look like?
sure, sure. So I joined the reserves, very brief stint, for about 6 months, 6 months to about a year. Um, and I was able to do that. People are like, how did you do that? And I was able to do that because I didn't sign any money or any like contracts. I just said, hey, I just want to join your unit because I want to see if this is a good fit. And I want to see if this is a good thing. And I really enjoyed it. I was working with brilliant folks out of Fort Totten in New York. Really enjoyed my time there. I was actually my company commander at the time, since it was a very interesting unit. We had company commanders in charge. It was an intelligence unit, so company commanders in charge of majors and other captains. It was pretty wild. But my company commander was actually somebody I went to college with. So it was incredibly fun. I enjoyed the people, super smart people with PhDs, and I really enjoyed what I was doing. However, again, I got to a point where their deployment cycle, which again, I was like, hey, I just want to join you for a little bit of time, see if this is a good fit, possibly go on a couple of deployments if that fits within the cycle of what I want to do. Um, but their deployment cycle was too heavy and too hot. They were wanting me to essentially, with the training cycle and the deployment cycle after I finally got my legs underneath me in the unit, was essentially wanting me to go back to the Army full time. And I said, okay, wait 1 second, let me stop, let me reevaluate what I'm doing. And this is aligned to the bigger picture of my values of my family, spending time with my family and supporting them, being a builder, and having to quit the job that I joined in order to go back to the military life. And so that's when I said, you know what, I'm all right. I don't think this is the right move for me. I'm going to have to back out. And again, not painting that one-way door decision. If by taking the sign-on bonus, by taking by signing a contract, so to say, I was able to serve. I was able to help out where I could, and then realize, hey, this is probably not for me, and I backed out of there. And it took several months to again work through the governmental paperwork to back out, and to rescind all my access and whatnot. But yeah, that was my very brief stint in the reserves.
Was it cool for you to be able, because I know you had some like emotional distress of leaving the army the
Sure.
first
Yeah.
Was it cool for you to be able to just make a more like a less like you were able to make that decision the second time with like less emotion? Like was that a good moment for you to kind of look and say like, wow, I stuck to my values and I did this and I felt good
Yeah.
about it?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
That's really, really cool. And I think that's awesome that you I think that I think the biggest thing that I found really just wonderful about this conversation is the concept. One, now everyone knows about two-way doors. So Amazon HR, if you're listening, we're spreading the good word. But also it's such a powerful concept because like we people view these things like don't view these decisions as permanent because most of the time they're really not, but also don't make them permanent unless you want them to be. And I think that there's so much wisdom like, hey, I went back into the military to check it out, but I also was very intentional about not locking myself in so that I could try it and then move on if I need to. And
Mhm.
I think for a lot of people, that is a making that rational decision and viewing all of those things in that way is just something that people don't think about or they don't give themselves enough time to think about. And I think that is just such a powerful lesson for folks to take away from your message, which I think is awesome. But dude, Hunter, it's been great. It's been great. It's
Yeah.
been great talking to you, man. Um, before we go, any final rounds, any last things that you really feel like you want to say to the listeners? Any last pieces of advice?
I think we
No,
covered it all. I think
you
we
said
covered
it
it all.
all. I love
Yeah.
that. I love that. You did great, and there's a lot of amazing things for people to take away from this conversation. So Hunter Tom, thank you so much for being on. And thank you so much for everybody else out there listening. Thank you so much for the support. And we will catch you on the next episode of the Post Military Podcast. Peace.